All right, well, we will jump in and get started here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for managing pavement projects around facility operations. We are super excited to bring you a panel discussion today about all things related to successfully managing complex and challenging pavement projects while maintaining facility operations. So we're going to jump in and get started here. So just a little bit about Benchmark. If you joined us last week, you saw this. So we're giving a shorter version of it today, but just a little bit about who we are. Benchmark is a roof and pavement consulting company. We are independent, privately owned corporation. And the main services that Benchmark provides are evaluation and asset management, design bid services, construction phase services or project management. We also work with clients on program management. If they have a pavement or roof management program, we can help with managing that. And then we also have in-house UAV imagery. And at Benchmark, our promise is that we keep our clients' best interests in mind, no matter what we're doing. So I'm super excited to introduce you to our panel today. We have Troy Kaiser, senior consultant. Troy was on last week's webinar as well. Troy has been in the industry for over 40 years, and he is instrumental in working with our clients that have pavement management programs, doing assessments, design, and construction phase services. Also want to introduce you to Jason Brazier. Jason is one of our senior consultants in PE at Benchmark, and Jason has been in the industry for, I think, about 31 years. And Jason enjoys all aspects of pavement consulting, but he would tell you, put me in the field and let me build a job. That's where Jason really shines and also does a lot of our design work. Also want to introduce you to Riley Stendell. Riley is one of our staff consultants, and I think Riley has over 37 years of experience in the industry. And Riley is known for taking on our most complex and challenging projects at Benchmark. And that smile you see, he always has that smile on his face. He says, you know, he wants the most complex project, and he just runs towards those challenges. And so with these three individuals here today, we have over 100 years of industry experience. And so super excited to moderate this webinar today and jump into some of the Q&A. So objectives for this webinar series. Last week, we brought to you a high level. This is a three-part series. And last week, we brought to you kind of the how and the why. We introduced some of the fundamentals of managing pavement construction projects around facility operations. If you missed last week's webinar, you can absolutely go and check it out on Benchmark's website. At the end of the three-part series, we'll also send out a link to the recording. But last week, we talked about things like phasing, plant shutdowns, alternating entrances and exits, temporary fencing, temporary access roadways, alternate parking lots, alternate delivery systems, how we would work with clients to make sure that they're stockpiling materials for production or for shipping. And so today we're really going to dive into some complex questions, and you're going to hear from our panel on just how they actually take those fundamentals and incorporate them in during the construction. So we're super excited today to answer all of your questions. If you have any questions for us, we did have some submitted ahead of time after last week's webinar, so we're going to dive into those. But if you have questions, I will be checking the Q&A, so please put your questions in there and we will work to get it answered. And then next week, we will wrap up this three-part series with case studies. So we're going to be highlighting 5 to 6 projects, and we're going to walk you through real-life case studies showcasing successful projects and what we learned along the way. So we hope that you will join us next week as well. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can see the panelists kind of front and center here, and we are going to jump right in. Just a reminder, please add your questions into the live Q&A, and we'll make sure to get them answered. All right, so let's see. I'm going to ask each one of you here, Jason, Riley, and Troy, in that order. This first question, this has to do with phasing. And so in regards to a quote unquote tough to phase paving project, what was the biggest challenge that you have faced and how did you solve that project? So Jason, you want to kick us off?
Sure. The big thing is every project's going to have some hiccups, some hurdles, some doors that need to stay open, things like that. And best way to avoid that or stay ahead of it is to pre-plan. A lot of projects I've been on, we have dock doors, we have dumpster doors, we have different things like that that need access at all times. And the best thing to come up with is what does each door function with and what can we do to rearrange that? Is there something we can do as far as utilizing different doors? Or if we have 4 doors that do that operation, can I take 2 and then do the other 2 the next phase and things like that? Communication is key, as well as having the most important people at the meetings that operate these doors. Who's running the inside of the building is just as important as who's outside the building, and keeping everything under control that way as well.
Awesome. So Riley, can you share with us maybe some examples of one of your kind of tough to phase projects and kind of walk us through it just a little bit?
Sure. I had a really difficult to build exit road at a client of ours, manufacturing. And we were taking the truck exit road and expanding it from 2 lanes to 3 lanes out and also replacing it. And it's on a curve. So as you all know, when semis turn, they need more room. So we're trying to expand the width of the roadway and replace it while semis are turning this corner. And it was quite a challenge. And basically you have to get in the mindset of a semi truck, and then you've got to get in the mindset of the semi truck driver with the lowest ability and cater your traffic control around that. And it was a challenge, but it turned out very well, and we didn't impact operations whatsoever. And that's the main thing. We don't interrupt your business. You keep going what you do, and we'll work around that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. Troy, do you have a tough to phase project that you could share a little bit with us about?
Sure. One of the more challenging projects I did was it was a manufacturing project on the East Coast in Virginia, large manufacturing facility. And like Riley's project, we were redoing and expanding the truck entrance and exit and converting from asphalt to concrete. And we were really having a tough time trying to figure out how to keep trucks coming in and out while we were doing these large concrete pours. We had a meeting, the pre-construction meeting. We talked about it extensively with the contractor and all the parties involved, like Jason mentioned. And what we ended up doing is we built a temporary pad next to the area, and we brought in a very large conveyor truck, which has a large boom that can convey the concrete. And it was able to extend across almost the whole project. So we did it at night when traffic was less, not completely, because it's a 24/7 facility. And by using this boom truck, the trucks coming in and out, we're actually able to drive underneath the boom in the open lane while we poured the rest of the lanes. And it worked out really nice. And kudos to the contractor on that job for coming up with that large boom truck that actually was able to allow the semi trucks to drive underneath it while conveying the concrete over to our slabs that we were pouring. So that was probably one of the more challenging projects I've done.
That's awesome. Thank you. All right, Troy, I'm going to give you this next question here. Have you ever experienced any safety issues from the lack of traffic control? And if so, how was that resolved on a project?
We make sure during our pre-construction meetings, we make sure that the contractors know that they need to maintain traffic control 24/7. We always tell them, if we're off on the weekend and a big storm rolls through, somebody's got to come out right away and reset the traffic control. It can't wait until Monday. If a storm rolls through on Saturday night, somebody's got to be there first thing Sunday to reset that. And I had a project this year where during the week, a storm rolled through at like 5 a.m. and just blew all the barricades all over the place. The contractor was normally on site between 6 and 6:30, but unfortunately, in that short time period between the storm and when the contractor arrived on site, somebody did drive into a shallow trench that we had dug next to some new curb that we poured. So you can't always avoid that. It really wasn't anybody's fault. It was just too short a time period between the storm and when the contractor got there. But that's the only time I've ever had issues in all my years at Benchmark with a traffic control issue causing a vehicle accident or any kind of safety issue.
Awesome. Thank you. Riley, I'm going to give you this next question that came in. How long after paving can you drive on new asphalt? I feel like that's kind of a loaded question. Oh, you're muted, Riley.
So on a car parking lot, typical car parking lot, you want the asphalt to cool preferably to ambient temperature, whatever your air temperature is, before you put your lines on it, because otherwise it has a tendency to brown the paint. So there, maybe if they're paving it that day, driving it safely in the next morning for that kind of thing would be the best practice. Sometimes your site doesn't allow you to do that, and if you get it below 120 degrees, I've already had fully loaded trucks driving on the pavement. Might consider a water truck to keep the surface wet. It creates a friction barrier so those tires can't grab the fresh asphalt and make any marks in it if they do happen to do a sharp turn. Main thing is keep moving. Don't let traffic sit on it. And if you really need to, I would say 4 or 5 hours, you could probably start getting on it if you do the best practices to keep it in a good condition.
Awesome. Thank you. Jason, you do a lot with concrete. This question has to do with concrete, so I'm going to throw this one over to you. How long after pouring concrete can it be open to truck traffic?
Kind of a loaded question. So the short answer is it completely depends upon the concrete mix itself. So the more long-winded answer would be the ingredients in concrete are cement, aggregate, sand, water, and admixtures. And that cement is the glue that bonds everything together, and that's actually what creates the hard surface. And the more cement that's in the concrete mix, the more expensive that mix is, which helps impact the cure time. So a lot of times if we're dealing with a truck entrance, truck exit, something like that, we will specify in the paperwork that there needs to be a 24-hour mix. So for rough numbers, you're now looking at, say, 800 pounds of cement or more within that yard of concrete to get you to that point. If we're doing sidewalks, we're going to specify more of a, 4,500 PSI in 28-day, 3,000 PSI in 3-day type mix. And that's going to be more where you're dealing with 600 or 650 pounds of cement per cubic yard. So again, anything can be done. Obviously to keep a truck driver exit operational, you pay the upcharge and you make sure that the concrete mix has the cement needed. And then within 24 hours, you're back to operational. The, lighter duty areas is where you can kind of save a little bit of that money and spec them out a little bit less. Dolly pads are kind of the same way. So it's very site specific and very project driven. And we like to specify at a minimum, everything that we put down is 3,000 pounds in 72 hours. So all of our mixes, all of our drives are open within 72 hours. But if there is that need to get on there the next day or the next afternoon, then we bump up the cement in the mix and we make that happen.
Awesome. Can you talk a little bit about how do you know when the area is ready to be open from a concrete area? How do you know that you've hit the necessary cure time and it's at the strength it needs to be at?
So part of the quality control, quality assurance that takes place with all the concrete work is they do a third-party lab is typically hired out from either the supplier or the contractor, and they pull what are called cylinders, and they're 6 inches tall, 4-inch diameter. And as the concrete is being poured, they will take samples of those cylinders. Our specification manual calls out for one set of cylinders every 50 cubic yards. And then once those cylinders are done, the truck comes in, they pull those cylinders, they set them aside, and they do that throughout the day of pouring. And then the next day they will come out, grab those cylinders. And if we're looking for 24 hours, they'll take those cylinders back to the lab. The lab then does a compression test on them and makes sure that we are getting that over 3,000 PSI on those small test cylinders. And as soon as we have that number, then we're acceptable and we're ready to open. So it's off-site destructive testing. Nothing happens to your new slab or anything of that nature. There is some new technology that you can put some electrodes in the concrete, different things like that. And it's supposed to kind of tell you what the concrete is doing, but we as Benchmark are firm believers in tried and true methods. And once we know that some of those methods are tried, true, and tested, then we will share those with our clients. Otherwise, we know breaking cylinders is the best, most informative option, and that's what we stick with.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. Riley, I'm going to give this next question to you. I just want to remind all of our attendees, keep the questions coming. We'll do our best to get all of your questions answered here as well. So Riley, the next question has to do with night work. And the question is, what are the advantages and or disadvantages of working at night? And in general, why are more projects not done at night?
Well, I'll answer the last question first. Same reason nobody likes to be working at night, because we're day creatures, and it's usually a little more costly in the manpower arena to get guys working nights. You're paying some premium hours. The reasons to do night work, sometimes it's necessity just because of traffic concerns to get materials to the site. If you're pouring concrete and you're in a heavy metropolitan area, you can't have those concrete trucks sitting in traffic, because you got a 90-minute window from the time they batch until the time they're empty. And if they're sitting in traffic and you've got a difficult pour, you might need to send that truck away. You run the trucks at night, less traffic. You can usually get some better production because you don't have a traffic issue at all. But you've got to have the right site. If it's an expansion type of site and you got your light poles in, you can work underneath the lights for the light poles. That works great. Otherwise, you can get light towers. They're easily rented anywhere, and you can make it happen that way. I don't know if there was another part to the question or not.
No, the question was really just about what are some of the advantages or disadvantages of working at night or having your project done at night.
Another one for concrete, it's usually cooler. If you're pouring during the summertime, you've got cooler temps to work with, makes it easier on the crew, makes it easier to finish. Big believer in not adding any surface water during the finishing operations, and that's a lot easier in cooler temperatures of the night.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's see. So, Troy, it looks like this next question has to do with ADA. So how do you handle ADA parking areas that need to be kept open for customers during construction? So if you're doing, sounds like if you're doing work in an area where there's ADA parking, how do you kind of work around that?
These are generally retail sites. Sometimes this does occur when we're doing like an employee parking lot or a visitor's parking lot at a manufacturing or distribution plant. If you've got to shut those handicap stalls down to reconstruct the area, you can move those temporarily, put temporary striping, temporary signs, even temporary handicap ramps in a different area while you're reconstructing the handicap area. That works very well. Or if they have a big enough handicap area, sometimes you can split that in half. Say they have 8-10 handicap stalls, say it's a larger site, you could do half of them at a time. There are ADA requirements that you have a certain amount of ADA parking, but generally during construction, I think it would be they'd be hard pressed to ticket you when you're reconstructing and making them better because you went down to half, especially if there's not people looking to use those stalls. They're generally only used like in a retail situation during the holidays, they're always being used. But if it's earlier in the year, you have those options of shutting half down at a time. But I did a project this year where we actually did move them to a different location, put temporary ramps in up to the sidewalk, and it worked very well.
Awesome. Thank you. Jason, I'm going to go back just a little bit here. We had a question come in that I think is in regards to the concrete question that came in before that you answered. So wondering if there is, and this is probably something we can provide offline too, but is there any sort of table or guidance on break strength, especially based on planned usage? And I think you talked a little bit about the PSI, and this individual said they joined a little late. So can you maybe go back and just talk about that just a little bit for us there?
Sure. So the big thing is 3,000 PSI is kind of the bare minimum to get any traffic on it. We like to utilize that number, whether it's light duty or heavy duty traffic. And then concrete throughout most of its life continues to age. There's a maturation curve that takes off quickly and goes up, and then it starts to kind of flatline. And what we look for is everything that you're looking to try to get out for a 25 or 30-year long pavement. The minimum 28-day design strength should be that 4,500, like I referenced. Now, mentioning earlier the 3,000 pounds in 24 hours, that's a lot of cement. Well, that concrete by 28 days is going to be upwards of 55 or 6,000 PSI by the time it gets to that point. There are admixtures as well that can make some impacts to some of these things. But as far as a light duty or heavy duty utilized pavement, it should always be 3,000 or better. And then 28 days, I would recommend 4,000 or 4,500 or better. If you're dealing with sidewalks, walkways, things like that, it could be lesser, but 99% of the time, the concrete suppliers are going to supply you guys with a mix that's going to at least break at 4,000 in 28 days.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, Riley, let's see. I'm going to give you this next question. This is kind of piggybacking off of the last one we asked Troy, but has to do with customer access. So how do you maintain customer access to a store if there's work taking place in the front of the store or within the main entrance?
Well, I had a site like that in Staten Island, New York, and the entire front of the store, well, the entire site, all the pavements, all the sidewalks were reconfigured, and it's a busy retail, a lot of foot traffic coming in and out, and the main thing is communication. Honestly, just communicate. People don't know. They're confused. They roll up, they see something's going on, they assume it's going to be a hassle. What do I do now? What do I do now? Signage, walkway this way, arrows, signs are cheap. There's signing contractors all over the place. Just communicate. And that is by far the easiest way to keep your people moving where they have to go. Also, don't underdo the traffic control. Fencing, consider temporary fencing, gives everybody a warm fuzzy that they feel safe on the inside. So.
Riley, you mentioned there's kind of signage companies everywhere. I'm curious, what's the advance notice that these signage companies need, and any idea what the cost is for the necessary signage to keep people safe?
I've gotten temporary signs a bunch. You can get it from almost any signage place. A lot of places they'll crank them out in 24 hours. You get it on a foam board core. You can tie it to your traffic control. You don't have to spend a lot of money. A 4x4 sign might be 30-40 bucks. It's really not that much. And they don't need to be retro reflective or anything like that, unless there's speed concerns on your site. Pretty easy thing to do. And yeah, customers end up liking it too, because then there's no more confusion.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than being a customer going into an area and you just don't even know how to get to the store. And that's why you're there, is you want to go through, you want to go shop there. So yeah, that's awesome. I would assume that most of the time we would be talking about necessary signage. It would be listed in the specification document if there's any specific signs that are needed, but also usually talking about it at the pre-construction meeting when you're really talking about the phasing and how it's going to happen a week before the job. You're kind of sitting down with the client and contractor. Is that right?
Yeah, and even if it doesn't come out necessarily pre-construction, you just by being on site and observing, customers, seeing if they're getting out of their car and zooming, they know what's going on. If you see that they're looking around a lot as they're getting out of their cars, I'll just take it upon myself and get a hold of the contractor and say, we need some signage up. So that could be a very fluid thing.
Okay. Yeah, that's great to know. All right, next question. This one kind of makes me laugh because maybe all three of you would have a different response to it. I don't know. So I'm not sure who wants to take the lead on this one. But the question is there a way to maintain access to 2 of 3 dock doors at their store while concrete's being replaced? So sounds like maybe they need to replace 1 concrete dock at a time. You want to take this one, Riley?
Sure.
All right.
I actually had, I'll take it even a step further. I had a job where we had to replace the concrete under an active dock door and not close it down. Like Jason mentioned, there's many different recipes of concrete. And we've got the schedule for the deliveries at that door. It was going to be a delivery at 11 a.m. and another one at 4 p.m., let's say. So before 11 a.m., we tore the existing concrete out and road plated it, let the semi back in for his delivery. The semi left. Then as soon as the semi's gone, we formed it up and poured it with a super high early mix. An 8 or a 9 bag is what they call it. Jason, I don't know what the pounds on that is necessarily, but it's a super high curing concrete that's ready for traffic in less than 12 hours. Poured it up, and by the time they get back for the afternoon run, they're ready to rock and roll again. So on two doors, 2 of 3 doors, or 1 of 3 doors, you start getting those joints too close to neighboring semi trailers. You almost need a door and a half to do one.
Okay.
Unless you've got some good width between your doors. If your doors are tight against each other and there's not a lot of room between the trucks, might need to do 1 and a half. Might need to take 2 out of service to get 1 done.
Okay. Okay. Troy or Jason, anything else to add to that one? Riley covered it.
I was gonna ask Riley if have you ever poured concrete and then put road plates back over the top to protect the concrete?
But I think in that case we did. I mean, our 9 bag was good, but I think we put the road plates on top just to further protect it, because then you're bridging out any wheel loads too. So that's a good best practice.
Can you explain to people, Riley, what road plates actually are?
Big steel plate, varying sizes. I've seen them as big as 8 foot by 20 foot. Solid steel plate, 3/4 or an inch thick. You see them out on road cuts. Sometimes I'll put a little patching around them and a little sign, slow bump. Same kind of thing.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing to consider is, expediting something like that. You might not have the prettiest finish, stuff like that happens, but we understand operations need to happen, and there's plenty of ways to make it work. Just kind of gotta brainstorm a little bit and work with the right people at the facility. So like I said, that's one of the challenges that we all like as a team, is just throw us something that you don't think can happen and we'll find you a way to make it happen.
And another, that's what's nice too, is when you're brainstorming, we can brainstorm with our peers, and between all of us, a lot of years, somebody's going to have an idea.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Jason, I'm going to give you this next one. You were kind of alluding to this here just a couple of minutes ago, but what are some of the best practices for keeping trucks moving in and out of docks and throughout a site during a pavement project? I know you work at a lot of our large manufacturing facilities, industrial type facilities. So what are some of the best practices?
Again, it comes down to knowing the functions of what's going on. I just wrapped up a project in Iowa, and the best thing we did was we had a meeting every morning at 7 a.m. and a guy over from shipping, not even in our work zone, not impacting any of his doors. The first thing he'd say to me is, Jason, I've got 42 trucks today. Okay, so I knew I had 42 trucks trying to find their way through my job site, not accessing any of my doors or anything else, just knowing that I had to figure those 42 out, make sure it was clear and easy, and security was there. So it's like, okay, which exit are you going to utilize this week? And it's like everybody's kind of mentioned already, communication is the thing. We ran under a little bit on the construction costs. So the facility had asked, hey, can you repair a couple potholes in front of the receiving doors? And I said, well, yes, but the contractor is going to want to do everything in one shot. So what can we do? And they're like, well, there's 2 receiving doors on this side, 1 receiving door on this side. But if we just use hand carts, how long is this going to take? I'm like, I need it from 6 a.m. till 6 a.m. the next day, 24 hours. They're like, oh, well, we'll just add a staff member and we'll use hand carts to move the material, 50 or 75 feet inside the building, and they can get it in and out of this door. I'm like, okay, perfect, problem solved. And then traffic control. Traffic control is key, as well as us as the consultant on site, always keeping our eyes open. Like Riley mentioned, people can't find their way into the grocery store we're working at or something. If you see that, you solve it. That's one of our responsibilities out there. It's like, make sure the traffic control is right. If you've got a truck driver that seems confused, walk up to the truck and ask them, where are you going? You know, we as consultants learn the site. Oh, you're going over to this store. Okay, your easiest way there is go this way, go back out the exit and come back in. Oh, I didn't know we could come in that exit this week. Well, we are. That's what we're doing. So that should have gotten reference to at security, and it's things like that. It's always thinking outside the box. And like I said, seriously understanding inside operations just as much as outside operations. And it can make anything and everything happen. That's part of our go-to and our challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Jason. Troy, I'm going to throw this next one over to you. The question is, I see temporary stop and go lights being used on roadway projects. Have you ever used them on a benchmark project?
I have not, and I don't recall anybody else ever using them that I've heard of on a benchmark project, but I have seen those myself, like when they're replacing a bridge on a county road or something, they'll put up automatic stop and go lights or temporary stop and go lights. Usually when we have a narrow area where we have to shut down at least one lane, but have to, maintain another lane. If it's asphalt and we can use flaggers during the day, that's going to be more cost effective. But if it's more of a long-term project where you're going to have half the roadway shut down for a significant period of time, I think they'd be very useful because they're 24/7. You obviously can't have flag people there overnight. So in a long-term project, I think it'd be something to look into, and I'd be willing to use them on that type of project. The right solution and at the right time, would be under the right conditions. It definitely would be an advantage in a long-term project.
Awesome. Let's see. So the next question, Riley, I'm going to toss this one over to you, has to do with striping and joint sealing taking place on a project. And what is the overall impact to reopening the pavement areas?
On concrete, our specs call for 2 coats of paint, and the curing compound that we spec on in our specifications is an oil-based or wax-based type of curing compound, which can affect the adherence of traffic marking paint. So a lot of times on concrete projects, I'll try to get the 1 coat of the lines down early and let it open to traffic. If it's a multi-phase job, let trucks drive out, let trucks scrub it, let the trucks start scrubbing that curing compound off, and then come back last thing before the job's finished up and throw another coat of paint on everything to make everything look beautiful. And it lasts quite well. When you're actually doing the lines, once the paint is down, it usually flashes in about 20 minutes and ready for traffic in about 30 minutes. So it can be done in live traffic if you've got traffic control and some flaggers that keep people separated from trucks or cars or what have you. It can be done in a rolling manner where you're slowly moving your way across a lot, moving cars, moving trucks, what have you. And joint sealing, typically it's spec to be done to concrete after 30 days. Sometimes the phasing on the project does not allow that. I have not really seen much detrimental impact joint sealing within a week or 10 days, really. It's all about proper prep. If you prep it properly and get everything clean, you'll get good adherence. And the main thing with joint sealing, don't get it. If you get the joint sealing too high, the truck tires have a tendency to grab it and twist it out of the joints. We want our joint sealing to be just below the surface of the concrete. That way the tires can't grab it. And that usually, whatever they joint seal, if they're joint sealing the area in the morning, usually by afternoon it's ready for traffic. But again, that's very temperature dependent. By the next morning, for sure, it's ready to go.
Okay. You mentioned 2 coats of paint. What is the benefit to 2 coats of paint?
Longer life, just a thicker film's thickness of paint. One coat, I've had contractors say, well, we put it on extra thick. We'll do 2 coats at once. I'm like, we'll do 2 coats in twice, but it's just longevity. Once you get those initial coats down, then you're set, your restripe, once it gets worn off, one coat on a restripe, then you're set, but 2 coats on the initial.
Okay, awesome. The next question has to do with phasing. And I know, Riley, you've seen this a lot. Jason and Troy probably have as well. So I'll throw it to you first, Riley. But Jason and Troy, if you've got something, please chime in as well. But is it recommended that asphalt and concrete work take place at the same time during a project, or should the work be done in separate phases at different times?
Well, if an area is like you've got phase 1 and it's a large area and it's got asphalt and concrete, you should do the concrete and asphalt all in the same phase. Usually the concrete work is going to get done because you're paving asphalt up to the concrete match point. So the concrete would be done first in the phase, followed by the asphalt. But ideally you have to get the phase done before you move on to another phase.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and the thing to consider with that too is, the concrete's got the cure time. The asphalt, again, if your asphalt's cooled 12 hours or 18 hours, depending on temperature. So it's important to kind of look at it as, what do we need to do to make sure that the concrete is in and gets that cure time on it before the contractor's running rollers on it. You look at dolly pads and trailer slips, they've got asphalt on both sides of the dolly pad. And a lot of times what we'll do when we're discussing schedules and things with the contractor is Thursday and Fridays are great days to pour concrete, because then you got the paving crew in there on Monday, everything's cured out over the weekend and you're good to go. Doesn't always work that way, but it's just definitely something to consider when you're dealing with both pavement types.
And Jason, you brought up a great point. I wasn't sure if you're going to mention it or not, but yeah, I absolutely want the concrete to be cured out to our design strength before we pave asphalt next to it, because the vibrations for the rollers can actually do some micro fracturing and damage that concrete. So,
correct.
Yeah, that's a really great point.
I wanted to add on that. Some projects, you can get the concrete going ahead. I had a project that had basically 3 roadways, and it was to be done in 3 phases. So we started phase 1 and we did all the concrete curb and the valley gutter repairs in phase 1. And because you're working the curb and gutter repairs along the edges of the roadways, they could use limited traffic control and allow those roadways to be open. So they moved right from phase 1 curb and gutter repair, and they went right into phase 2 doing the curbs under traffic, while phase 1 was closed and the milling and the asphalt paving operations were going on. And we actually just had the concrete continuously work through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So they were completed before under traffic, and then heavily barricaded until that phase was shut down completely for the milling and paving operations. So in some cases, you can let the concrete guys go and work in the other phases, because they do have the capability of working under traffic.
and that's a great point, Troy. And the project I'm on right now, in fact, is a little different. It's phase 1. There are 2 phases on the project. Phase 1, starting the end of this week, we're going to start putting semi-trailers on a portion of the phase. So that way we can take trailers off of a portion of phase 2 and get the excavating contractor to start doing his excavation, base preparation, fabric, base aggregate installation, and fine grading. He can get a jump on that while the concrete crew is still finishing up on phase 1. So we're doing a soft open on phase 2 or phase 1, and soft beginning on phase 2.
Well,
flexibility is what it's all about.
Yeah. And the other thing to consider with the concrete work, like you mentioned, Troy, doing the curb and gutter, a good concrete crew is going to tear out 250 foot of curb, and then the next day they're going to set it, and then they're going to pour it, and they're going to keep doing that. But when the paving crew comes up, that paving crew is liable to mill and pave 1,000 feet in one day. So it's like, if they're not that far ahead already, the paving crew is going to catch them in a heartbeat. So it's good to work the small areas and get the time consuming work out of there, because the paving guys, the right crew, gets a lot of work done in one day.
Yeah. Sounds like there's no two projects that are the same, just hearing you guys' experiences from phasing and all of that. So that's really cool. All right, the next question, we talked about this a little bit last week in some of the fundamentals. Riley, I'll toss this one over to you. But are there cost advantages to scheduling work during my facility's annual shutdown, or will I pay more because it's a very specific time? And then there's kind of a second part to that. What about holiday work when there's less employee traffic? What are the benefits or disadvantages?
Okay, sometimes the shutdown type of work is like mission critical stuff where we've got to get this task done by this date, no ifs, ands, or buts, or Mother Nature, rain, snow. I replaced a railroad crossing once where we broke ground at 10 o'clock at night on a Friday, tore the railroad crossing out and replaced it, including the rails, and had it open to truck traffic again by Sunday night at 10 o'clock, working 24 hours a day. During they shut down specifically for that project. Now, if you've got like a shutdown week and you've got a week's worth of work, Mother Nature can play a part in that. You could have 2 days of rain and now it's your shutdown, and you could end up getting stung by that if you absolutely had to be ready to go again by Monday morning. So it's touchy. You can save some money if you've got an extended shutdown. Let's say it's a couple weeks and you got a larger area. So instead of 2 phases, you've got a contractor that thinks they can knock it out in one. If you can give them the whole area, you'll probably get a price break on that too, because it's an economy of scale. Every time they have to move equipment there and move it back, it's thousands of dollars. So there is a cost savings if you can make it happen.
Yeah. What about holiday? I feel like that's sometimes controversial in our industry, but what about working over a holiday? Sometimes it's like, well, I'm not going to have employees, or I'm not going to have trucks coming in. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, usually employees aren't gonna want to work holidays too much, but they can be sometimes coerced payment wise to work. But the problem is a lot of times is materials. You're not going to get concrete on a holiday. You're not going to get asphalt on a holiday. Aggregate and probably your dump site isn't going to be open either. So unless you've got a really unusual circumstance where you don't need outside materials, or you've already got them on site, probably not going to happen.
Okay, good to know. Jason, next question has to do with, so here's the question. We get a large amount of trucks a day through our inbound truck lanes. It seems nearly impossible to shut a lane down to rehabilitate our entrance roadway. Any thoughts or suggestions?
Yeah, actually, I'm not on it. It's one of my projects, but one of our other consultants is on one right now that the site sees upwards of 300 trucks a day. It's currently 3-lane, and it all is getting updated with new electronics, new pavement, everything. And what we did with that one to start off right out of the gate was we widened it to give it a little more of a straight line access. And then we were able to utilize that widening, kind of how Riley mentioned before with the dock doors. You know, we need that safe work zone. You know, if you think about it, if you actually stand out there and watch concrete go down, you know, the finishers need room to pull the brooms and pull the trowels and all this stuff. And you need that space, but we widened it and was able to cut them down to 2 lanes and then finished the one and made it wide enough where it was kind of a lane and a half, and then went to the opposite side. So then we were running 2 sides, and then eventually we ended up doing the middle. But the easiest thing and the most, you know, the simplest thing is to widen it permanently. But there is also that option if the ground is level enough around it to just build a temporary lane. It's not perfect, and depending on the investments you want to do, you know, our recommendation in a trucking lane that's stopping at a guard shack and getting checked in and all this stuff is always concrete. The vibration from the trucks and everything else just deteriorate the asphalt. It's just what happens. But if you wanted to create that 12 or 14 foot wide temporary lane, because it was a dire need, you could construct that out of aggregate and asphalt and just know that you're spending money on something that's not going to be permanently in place, but it will keep your operations up. And those are easily things that we can put into the bid documents and price out, and then you can actually see, okay, just for this amount of work, it's going to be $65,000. Is that justified to keep this operational or not? So there's a few ways around it, and we deal with it all the time. You guys aren't the only ones that see this coming in, and how do we stay operational? And a lot of times, again, it kind of goes back to personnel. Like, I've seen sites that they actually show me the log and show how many trucks have been, submitted. But then I also see sites that my contact tells me, well, we have 150 trucks a day coming in, and I'm working in that area and I'm logging what's happening, and he's seeing 65 or 70. So sometimes bad information can really impact how a thing goes. So it's good, like I said, to make sure we've got good information, legitimate answers, and plenty of solution opportunities. And like Riley mentioned, if it's not popping into my head quick, I've got a handful of other guys that do this every day that I can reach out to say, hey, brainstorm with me on this one and help me out. And it's doable.
And
Yeah,
also during the data collection process, like when we're out taking a look at the site and determining the best course of action and that sort of thing, we're walking the site, and we're a lot of times interacting with the people that are outside, spotter drivers, truck drivers, finding over the road guy. Do you hear a lot? Yeah. What's your biggest hassle when you're here? Well, he'll tell you a story. They're glad to talk to you about it. And the spotters really have a really, really good idea as far as traffic. As far as, how many trailers this side of the building sees a day, compared to the other end of the building, let's say. Great sources of information. And we'll use that too.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, we have a couple more questions in queue. So for those of you tuning in, if you have additional questions, we might have a couple more minutes to get a couple more questions. So please get those in the Q&A if you could. Troy, the next one I'm gonna give to you here. What are the costs associated with temporary access and or like a temporary guard shack in particular? And then is it possible to set up electricity and plumbing if needed in those guard shacks? I know you shared last week a little bit about your recent experience.
Yeah, I had a project this year where we needed a temporary guard shack with power. It didn't have a lot of the more complicated electronics, card readers, those kind of things. So we just needed a basic shack with power. We didn't need to have plumbing to it. So it was a temporary shack with a generator, and it was $5,000 a week. We had budgeted for 4 weeks. Luckily, we got the job done in like 2.5. So it worked out really well for what we're planning. Plumbing, I've never seen temporary water go to a guard shack. If you need water, you'll bring in bottled water. Obviously, you're not going to have restroom facilities there, but very doable. We've used temporary guard shacks a bunch. Yeah, I think if you budget between $5,000 and $10,000 a week, that's gonna probably cover it.
Okay. Riley or Jason, any additional experiences with temporary guard shacks in particular on any of your projects?
The one that I just wrapped up, it was a one-way directional site. So they always had the one shack kind of at the exit point to check everything in. And as we were doing work around this site, we pretty much turned it into a two-way site where there was an option for 3 potential entrance and exit points. And we almost always had 2 running at all times. And like Troy said, it was, I think our shack was about $5,000 a month. And then the toilets, the portable toilets are small into that as well. But they had kind of brought up concerns with staffing as well, because this particular facility had only, 3 guards in one shack at all times. Well, now they were possibly needing 2 in that one and then 1 in this one. And then when I throw them a curveball and say, well, this is our best entrance and exit for this week, then, okay, well, I got to get 1 more staff member, and we can't utilize that, after hours. But yeah, it can be costly, but it's worth it in the long run. The project I was on was 99% concrete. So no matter what we did, we were looking at, cure times and different things like that. So we couldn't even get temporary stuff really built around it. But again, planning for it is okay. It's just, if you've got the ability to move from one spot and keep the staffing and everything together, minimal cost. But if you're adding staffing, that could add up quickly.
Yeah, the staffing is going to be the most expensive part of a temporary guard shack on a larger project.
Yeah. All right. Looks like we've got 2 more questions in queue unless any others come in. So Riley, what is the best way to get ahead of subgrade issues once pavement's been excavated and removed? And how do you know you won't encounter soft spots or sinkholes underneath?
Sinkholes, I've never run into a sinkhole. Maybe a small one, but that's usually a failure in the plumbing system somewhere along the way, and to be repaired. When we get into a site, we do geotechnical borings, see what the soil is like, see what the moisture content of the soil is like, determine what kind of weight bearing and stability that the soils have. And on a typical site might be 10, 12 different boring sites spread out at random around the site. But that's not 100%. It's not 100% going to tell you every detail about your site. You could have a soft spot in between your bore areas. You take the pavement off, you take the base material out, and you see that it's moving around. It's unstable. We usually do a proof roll, take a fully loaded dump truck, and basically drive the entire site and determine what's unstable. And my personal rule of thumb is, once I'm approaching about 30-40% of the site that's looking like it's unstable, your best cost effective method to remedy that at that point is maybe start looking into a chemical stabilization of the soil. Otherwise, you're undercutting. Undercutting the depth is based on what I'm seeing out there, how much it's moving, and the years of experience on what I know is going to take care of that. We don't want to excavate everything to China. Minimal amount of excavation to get it stabilized again.
And undercutting is usually there's some sort of allowance typically in bid documents. If Benchmark's doing the design correct, we're usually trying to calculate some sort of allowance.
Correct. Usually we'll put a contingency on there based on what our geotechnical borings are telling us that we might be running into, and maybe just a little more to hedge it just to be safe on the safe side. But again, until you tear it apart, you're not going to know exactly what you get. And unfortunately, sometimes it's not pretty.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and there's some new technology now out with some fabrics and geogrids and things like that as well that could be an option. You know, it's sometimes, like Riley said, you just don't really know until you're there.
Yeah, unstable subgrade or subbase, it's kind of like the weather. It's an unknown. It's going to throw a monkey wrench in your schedule because it's going to increase the time needed to get the site ready for the pavements. A key thing how to prepare for it is have those contingency items in your bid for the stone undercutting, the fabrics, the geogrids. Get those prices from the contractors at the time they're fighting to get the work. You'll get the best pricing compared to, oh, we found a soft spot, now give us a price to dig it out. It's not going to be as good a price as if it was when they were hungry for work and looking to get the project. And so to avoid that price creep, we want to make sure that we have those contingencies in place to handle those. And then it avoids any paperwork and slowdowns. Riley or whoever's on the site can say, okay, this needs to be undercut. We've got an item, undercut it right now. It keeps the project moving along and hopefully, not too far off schedule.
Yeah, nothing worse than a pavement project getting delayed because you don't have the necessary money or contingencies built into the project budget, for sure.
Right.
All right, so one more question that we have in queue here. Troy, I'll give this one to you. What are the most cost-effective ways to control traffic during a pavement project?
Any kind of traffic control that doesn't require flaggers. Traffic control is, like Riley said, and signs are very inexpensive compared to the job they do. So the most cost effective is barricades and signs. Use flaggers when you need to, but realize that that's just like with the temporary guard shacks. It's anytime you have to have extra personnel, it's going to increase your costs quite a bit. So just pre-planning, have a traffic control plan. Use lots of barrels, lots of signage. That's going to be your most cost-effective way of doing traffic control.
Awesome. So Riley and Troy and Jason, we've asked you guys a lot of questions today. Together, between the three of you, you have over 100 years of industry experience. I guess let's end with, do you have any advice for those tuning in today? Or was there a question that maybe we didn't ask you today that you were really hoping to share some sort of experience or just some insight from the industry that you want to leave our viewers with today before we wrap up?
I guess my thing is, construction projects are not cheap and there's a lot that goes into them. And the three of us on the panel here all used to work for contractors before we all came over to the consulting side. And a little bit of time, a little bit of money, and some pre-planning before anything takes off is really your best way to ensure some success. Riley talked about borings, and we've talked about schedules, and we've talked about contractors, and I guarantee anybody on this call could reach out to 3 or 4 contractors and ask them to look at their employee parking lot and give them prices to fix it, and they're going to get 3 or 4 prices, and nothing's going to be the same. None of the estimators are going to look at it the same way. Everybody's going to have a solution, and that's not to say the solutions won't work, but they might not be the best solution. And that's kind of what we pride ourselves on, is making sure that we can give our clients what they need and do our best to give them apples to apples and advise them to spend their money as wisely as possible. But sometimes it takes a little bit of upfront and to make that happen, but it's well worth it in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. Riley, anything you want to, any parting remarks?
Well, you mentioned that no 2 jobs are the same, and I always looked at every job's like a fingerprint. Everyone is absolutely unique. They've got their own little wrinkles and details, and the planning, the communication ahead of time. So then there aren't the phone calls like, hey, we need door 32 today. We try to take care of that prior and have that all worked out ahead of time. And sometimes it can be a challenge, but I haven't. Jason, Troy, have we ever found one where we walked away from, we couldn't get it figured out? Nah. But a lot of contractors will also bid according to what their strengths are or what their weaknesses are as well. They might have the certain machinery for doing the process a certain way that might not be the best for your site. We try to bring some standardization to the industry and keep that from happening.
Absolutely. Troy, anything from you?
Yeah, just a few. The larger area you can give your contractor to work in, the better pricing you're going to get. And although it might seem like a pain to give up a large area, it's like ripping off a Band-Aid. Get the hassle out of the way as quickly as possible. It may seem easier to break it down into a bunch of little areas, but that's just going to drive up the cost. It's going to actually be more hassle than to just, let everybody know we're going to be doing a project. We're going to be giving them big areas. It's going to save us money. And yeah, people are going to have to park further away and walk further, and it's going to be a hassle, but it's going to get done quicker and sooner. And they'll remember it less if you get it done in 3 weeks instead of 8 weeks. So, always keep that in mind, that you don't always want to break it down into little pieces if you don't have to.
Dovetailing to what Troy just said. Also, if you've got a site with a lot of semi-trailers, some facilities have truckers that will leave 10, 20, 30 empties on site, just so that they're there when the time comes to be loaded, and they'll sometimes bring a few extra because you've got the extra space, so they're going to use it. You might want to consider looking at pricing out an auxiliary drop lot during the project where you can take half of your trailers and move them off site. Because then you're going to give a bigger area to the site, which is going to end up saving you that money, and it could be a wash. You could end up getting the work done faster at a cheaper price if you could get some of the stuff off of your facility.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, it is noon, so we want to wrap up here and be respectful of people's time, but we just want to thank everybody for joining us today, for asking good questions. Troy, Jason, Riley, thank you again for being a part of the panel discussion today. Next week at the same time, Wednesday, October 23rd at 11 a.m. Central, we will be coming to you with the third part of this three-part series, and we will be showcasing 5 to 6 case studies. So we're going to be talking about sharing a lot of pictures, showing the challenges, and talking through actually how we implemented a lot of what we answered for you today with real life projects. So we hope to see you next week for the third part of this webinar series. And again, thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day to join us. Have a great day.